Okay, picture this. A brand new democracy, the biggest in the entire world, is holding its very first election. Now, imagine one single party wins, and doesn't just win, but absolutely dominates politics for the next 20 years. Well, that's exactly what we're talking about today. This is the story of the Indian National Congress and its era of one-party rule.
So here's what we're going to do. First, we'll dive into the incredible context of this huge political experiment. Then, we'll check out the mind-blowing results from the first 3 elections. After that, we're going to uncover the secrets to their dominance, explain this thing called the Congress system, and finally, we'll dig into the legacy of it all.
All right, let's travel back in time. It's 1951. India is brand new, just got its independence, and is still reeling from a really violent partition. And now, it's about to hold its very first general election. I mean, you can imagine, the stakes were just sky high.
You know, a lot of people on the outside were looking at this and thinking, this is never going to work. They literally called it the biggest gamble in history. And you can totally see why, right? How could a democracy really take root in a place dealing with so much poverty, massive social divisions, and, fresh off a brutal partition? It seemed impossible. And the scale of it all, I mean, it's just staggering. We're talking about 173 million eligible voters. Just let that number sink in. At the time, it was the largest exercise in democracy the world had ever seen. Just figuring out the logistics was a Herculean task. And get this, on top of everything else, only about 15% of those voters could read or write. So yeah, people were seriously wondering if this whole democracy thing could even work. But what happened next? Well, it pretty much shocked the world. So the big question is, how did this massive gamble actually pay off? Well, the results of that first election, and the next 2 after that, set a pattern of dominance that would basically define Indian politics for an entire generation. Just take a look at these numbers from the 1952 election. The Indian National Congress walked away with a whopping 364 seats, and their closest competitor, the Communist Party of India, they got just 16 seats. I mean, that's not even a competition. It wasn't just a win, it was an absolute landslide.
And you might think, okay, maybe 1952 was a fluke, but it wasn't. Look at this. They did it again in 1957, grabbing 75% of the seats, and again in 1962 with 73%. We're talking about a solid 15 years where they consistently held almost 3/4 of the entire parliament. It's just incredible.
But wait a second. Just because they had this iron grip on the national stage, it doesn't mean there was zero opposition anywhere. Actually, something really fascinating was happening down in the state of Kerala that proved democracy was still alive and kicking. So, get this, in 1957, the very same year Congress was crushing it nationally, the Communist Party made history in Kerala. They formed the world's first ever democratically elected communist government. It was a huge deal, but it didn't last long. Only 2 years later, the Congress government in the capital controversially used its power to dismiss them. This was a really big moment, showing just how much power Congress had, and it kind of hinted at the tensions we'd see later between the central government and the states. Okay, so we've seen the what, these massive back-to-back victories. Now let's get into the really juicy part, the how and the why. How on earth did one party pull this off and keep it going in a democracy that was supposed to have tons of different parties? And this right here is the central puzzle of this whole story. It's a bit of a brain teaser. So, for example, in 1952, Congress won almost 3/4 of the seats, but they only got about 45% of the actual votes cast. How? How does that even work? Well, the secret is all in how the elections are run. Okay, so India uses what's called a first-past-the-post system. It's actually really simple. Think of it like a race. The person who crosses the finish line first wins. You don't have to win by a lot, you just have to get more votes than anyone else in your district. You don't need a majority, more than 50%, you just need the most. And this little rule had a massive impact. Now here is where it gets really wild. If you look at the total vote share from 1952, more people actually voted against Congress than for them. Yeah, you heard that right. All the opposition parties together got 55% of the vote. So a majority of Indians voted for someone else, but Congress still won that massive landslide. So how did that happen? Well, that's the magic trick of the first-past-the-post system. That 55% of the vote that went against Congress wasn't for one party. It was split between a whole bunch of different opposition parties. So, in district after district, the Congress candidate might get 45%, while 4 other candidates split the rest. The Congress candidate still wins. And that's how 45% of the votes magically turned into 74% of the seats. But you know, the voting system was just one piece of the puzzle. It definitely helped them. It amplified their wins, for sure. But it wasn't the only reason. There were some really deep, fundamental factors that built the foundation of their dominance.
So let's break it down. First, you've got their history. They were the party that led the freedom struggle. Their leaders were national heroes. Second, their organization was incredible. They had a presence in basically every town and village. Third, you had a superstar leader in Jawaharlal Nehru. Fourth, as we just talked about, the voting system was tilted in their favor. And finally, they were like this giant rainbow coalition. They managed to bring almost every group in society, from farmers and factory workers to rich landowners and businessmen, all under one big umbrella.
When you put all those things together, it created something so unique and powerful that political experts actually gave it a special name. They don't just call it one-party rule. They call it the Congress system.
So what does that mean, the Congress system? Well, here's the key idea. The Congress Party itself was so massive and so diverse. It had all these competing ideas and groups within it, that the real political fights in India weren't happening between Congress and other parties. Nope. The real fights, the real debates were happening inside the Congress Party, between its own different factions.
And this system had some huge effects. On the plus side, it brought a ton of stability to India in those really fragile early years. It was the glue that held a super diverse country together. But on the downside, because it basically absorbed all the different viewpoints, it kind of starved the opposition parties of oxygen. They were left on the sidelines, which created a pretty big imbalance in politics.
All right, so as we start to wrap this up, let's think about the big picture. What was the lasting impact of this Congress system? How did this whole era of one-party dominance end up shaping India's democracy for the long haul?
I think this really sums it all up perfectly. On one side of the ring, you have Congress. They were united, they had these legendary leaders, and they were everywhere in the country. And on the other side, you had the opposition. They were broken up into lots of little parties, they didn't have a big national leader to rally behind, and their influence was often stuck in just one or two regions. It was a mismatch from the start.
Look, there's no question. This period was absolutely foundational for India. It proved to the world that democracy could work on a massive scale, and it gave the new country the stability it desperately needed. But it also left behind some really tricky questions about what a healthy political opposition should look like.
And that brings us to the final question I want to leave you with. What does it really mean for a democracy when the only real opposition is inside the ruling party itself, not outside of it? Is it a good thing, a sign that a party can accommodate everyone? Or is it a bad thing that makes all the other parties, well, kind of pointless? It was the defining question of India's early democracy, and honestly, it's a question that still comes up in political conversations all over the world today.